Good day. Can anybody hear me? This is unusual for me. Okay. Well, I hope. I can see there's somebody joining in. So I guess I have to wait for people to join. Yes? Do I have to wait for people to join? Well, I guess I'll just wait for another minute or two before I start. Okay. Okay. So should I start? Well, I guess I'll start, right? It's my first time, so I am a little worried. Now, well, I guess I'll start, and then perhaps people will join in, or I know it will be then put on later on. So I have to introduce myself. My name is Ivan Bogantsev, and I'm the head of a private school in Moscow. And my goal is here to tell you a little bit about my story and the school story. And it is a little unusual because I'm working as a head of a school for only a year and a half, and I had no previous experience working in school when I embarked on this mission. And yet well, I strive to change and reform the school and implement the innovations which we're looking for it everywhere, including HundrED. And by now we have a certain experience of implementing those innovations, and I would be happy and ready to share this experience. I will first tell you a little bit about our school and about the local needs, the local community. Now, I prepared the presentation, but apparently you cannot. The Facebook Live doesn't allow to switch from camera to share screen mode. So we came up with this ingenious device of actually having a presentation on screen. Having a presentation on screen here. I'll have to adjust it so that I can then sometimes show you the slides, and sometimes myself, right? Because I was told you still have to see myself. Now I hope you can hear me well, because there's no indication of it on screen. And in case you don't hear me well, please write me a comment or something, so I will speak louder, okay? Good. Now, I call my presentation "Turning School into a Spaceship," because in reality we don't, we have a feeling, me and my team, we have a feeling that the way the school exists in Moscow currently, in Russia, is not the way it should exist, and that we have to transform it into something very different. Now, I don't actually, why we say spaceship, because we don't actually have a specific plan what we want to transform it into, right? We have a feeling, intuitions, and we have certain values according to which we make transformations, but overall, we cannot say where we go, right? I mean the final destination. But we have a dream, and the spaceship is a good metaphor for a dream. Okay? So I'll tell you a little bit about our school. We had to make the presentation a little bit, to sacrifice the design to visibility. Now, this is the information about the school, how it used to be created. It was founded in 1992, and it was always a very traditional private school. Though, 1992 meant that it was one of the first private schools in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I don't think that I have to, hide the fact that it was my mother who started the school, who ran the school for 26 years before I took over a year and a half. And it was always a very, I would say a solid private school. We've been certified by International Baccalaureate in 2003, 2007, different programs, PYP and YPPP. By now we have 400 students in kindergarten and in school, and people do go to the better European and American universities from our school, and in fact. They don't have, often they don't have much of a choice, because International Baccalaureate diploma is not accepted by Russian universities, so you cannot join Russian universities through International Baccalaureate. People have national exams, so some of our graduates, they go and sit national exams and go to Russian universities, and others go to European universities. And this is basically the school that I joined a year and a half. This is the general information. I will now share some local problems. Now I have to make it visible for you. Now, by local I mean the community and the school itself. So one of the local problems is the rigid national curriculum. You have to, living in Russia, teaching, whether it's a public school or a private school, you have to follow a certain curriculum which is quite rigid, and it's becoming a little bit more and more rigid, on every level. So I would say that the curriculum is a little unbalanced. There's a lot of sciences, there are very few space for arts, for example. I would say that some of the subjects and some of the subject guides are, you would say, politically charged. Not many, but still, there's a lot of talk going on about having a very strict reading list, for example, in the literature subject guide that you cannot deviate from. So this is, if you want to give your students flexible and modern education, that is the difficulties you have to overcome, right? You have to overcome by adjusting the timetable, by playing around with it, and sometimes it's not even possible, but that's the reality you live in, right? Another problem that I face as a school, this is perhaps my vision, is that it's always been a private school, and the private school in Moscow. Russia, I would say private schools are very few. and they're not really supported by the state, so their economic existence is very fragile, right? So having a private school meant attracting very heterogeneous community of parents, right? They have conflicting interests, they have conflicting values, and in the end, what I received was a school torn a little bit by those values apart. You know, it will be clearer in the end of the presentation when I explain that, you know, some of the parents were not ready for those innovations that we suggested, and they left from very different poles, you know, for very different reasons. And finally, we have a rather conservative society, and even among the parents who support us now, a lot of them still afraid of change. A lot of them want their children to receive the same kind of education they receive. And there is a myth, for example, that some would consider it the truth, but the myth of the Soviet education that was very solid, that was very progressive, and a lot of people want their children to receive that kind of education, and they don't want the innovations to be implemented, even in a private school like ours, not to mention the public school. So these are the problems we had to overcome. Now, I faced with those problems, but I had a particular difficulty. I never worked at school before. For a few years, I worked in a museum. This was an educational department of the museum, but still. And so I had no real vision of how the school should be transformed, to be honest. And but very quickly we realized that, you know, it's a disadvantage, the lack of experience. But then there's so many teachers within the school that have this experience and that I can consult with. But then it gives you also a certain advantage, because you're sometimes bold enough to change things that have not been changed for, you know, for reasons of habit. Habit is a very strong thing, especially in education. So this lack of experience, you know, in some way brought us the new vision, and in some way new energy, right? Though, of course, it had the I have to be honest, it backfired in certain instances, but that's how life is. So, what would we start the transformation with, right? We decided that we have to first formulate our mission. And this was a very important step, because I think any change in any institution such as a school should come from ideology. And the ideology should be the foundation of the school. And we tried to formulate this very simple mission. I don't think it's any kind of invention, but helping every student to become the best version of themselves. This is what we thought that the school should be about, right? That we should try to work with, there are many important words in it, you know, that we help students. That is to say that the students should possess certain initiative, right? We're helping them, we're not pulling them through, right? We try to help every student in the way that we are not the school that should focus on stronger children, on children with some kind of super abilities. There are schools that, you know, within the Soviet system, there was a segregation between the schools for stronger children and schools for weaker ones. So we try to work with everybody. That doesn't mean that whoever comes to us, we will. It means that we do an attempt to work with every child, and sometimes there is a combination. This is mutually beneficial, sometimes it's not, but we do try that, right? And the best version of themselves, that is to say that the most important thing the school can do is to teach a child something important about him, to teach him to know himself, right? To learn something about himself and about his future aspirations, so that he leaves the school on the right path, right? And the best version of themselves can be very different. You know, a lot of parents feel that, for example, the university career is a must after school, right? But in reality, some children want to become circus actors, right, or something else, and you have to give them within the school environment this opportunity. Now, the other thing that I have to focus is the values, right? The values is the other thing we formulated, and the idea was, of course, to bring teachers in and to discuss it with them, right? We discussed it with the whole assembly of teachers. What would be the values that our school should promote? And what we can see here, we have positive thinking as an essential condition for any action. We have freedom to choose. We have openness, responsibility, respect, and aspiration for lifelong learning. You cannot see it in the bottom right corner. Now, the values in itself are also, there's nothing special about those values. I think freedom, positive thinking, and openness are the kind of things that a lot of schools would name. But the important thing is, of course, if you are consistent with those values, and if you actually try to apply those values to your actions, to whatever actions are there in the school. If you are hiring a new teacher, or if a new teacher is in class and introducing new teaching methods, do those teaching methods correspond to the values? This is an important question that we all have to answer, and that I push teachers and administration and myself to question, right? And so I think that this mission and values, and whatever reform, whatever innovation we implement, whether it is in management, in education, in architecture, in communication, these are the changes. This is the areas where we changed something within this first year. I think those you should always ask yourself if the mission and the values are the foundation of those changes. They should not be changes for the sake of changes, because that brings nothing, right? So I'll start perhaps with management. One of the things we did is that we created a new way to manage school, right? Schools traditionally in Russia, there's a traditional way to govern a school, right? You have a headmaster, then you have deputy heads, and then you have class teachers, and normally all of them have their own cabinets, you know, own private offices. And if a parent has a problem, for example, he's going to his class teacher, then he's going to deputy head, then if the problem is yet unsolved, he's going to the headmaster, and so on and so forth. Now, what we did is that we put everybody in the same space, and this space is, well, you can see it in the picture. I don't know if it's any visible, and we're all sitting together, and there is no door in this open office, and children and parents come in whenever they have a problem, and one of the people sitting there would always try to solve this problem. So it's a very direct way of communication and management. We don't have the offices, and we have some spaces to have a private talk or negotiation, but no offices. And in a way, we don't have our status within the management team is equal. We don't have privileges, and this is one of the very important ideas that we tried, the egalitarian idea and the idea of direct communication. And I think, within this first year and a half, this was quite unusual for parents and for students, but it was in the end, very quite well received and effective. You know, a lot of people thought that sitting together would be harmful to the result. And of course, there were some difficulties, but overall, I'm very happy with the way it was implemented. Though we didn't have this one, this change we, so to speak, invented ourselves, right? One of the things here, one of the examples, I'm just giving you examples of those changes, and another example would be a communication, local communication revolution. We try to put everybody on the same communication platform. That is to say, this is Slack. You can see it on the right here. So Slack is I'm sure a lot of you would know, is a communication application where all of our teachers and all of our staff was joined in, and thereby creating a network also to communicate directly. So as a school head, I would receive private messages from any teacher. If he's got a question, he can address me the question directly. But also there are channels where you can announce, well, there are a channel, for example, for private school, for primary school, or for the secondary school, or the class teachers. And whenever we have to communicate a certain idea, ask a question from primary teachers only, we can ask them directly via Slack channel. Right? But there's also some other channels there that help manage the school. There is a separate channel for students' achievements. Whenever a student in school, anywhere in the kindergarten or in the primary school, has a certain achievement, we put it, we write about it in the channel. First of all, it increases our, our spirits, because people, teachers are very happy to see the result of their work, and then we can somehow, we can somehow know that maybe, maybe the student receives some sort of a recognition within school. There's also, to be honest, a channel for misdeeds. You know, whenever a student trespasses the rules of school, we also know that in the channel, and in the end, he may suffer certain consequences, and we can bring it up when talking to his parents and so on and so forth. So it's just an instrument to use. But Slack has also been quite efficient. We can still push the efficiency, but the communication solves a lot of, such communication solves a lot of problems. People, they stop whispering in corners, but they discuss things openly, even such difficult questions as issues with pay, for example. I had an example when there was like unclear how students would be paid during the national holiday or something, and the teacher just took the channel, which is general. There's a general channel where every teacher and every member of staff is joined, and she wrote me a direct question online, so I had to respond to it, and that perhaps eased some tensions, So I think quite effective. Now, there are some changes, of course. Most of the changes, they were to do with education and with children. And those were many, and I wouldn't say they were taken very lightly. One of the things that I did, and that seemed very simple and straightforward to me, is to do with the way the school operates in Russia. The traditional way is that there are lessons. In between lessons there is 10 minutes of free time, and they are all cut. This day is cut into pieces by this bell, which rings very loudly throughout the school. So once it rings, the children jump up and they run into the corridor, right? And then it rings again, and they run back into classroom, right? So one of the things that I thought we should do is just abolish those rings, right? Those bells. It should not ring, it should be silent, and children should just go in class and outside of class, right? I thought, you know, if we put clocks everywhere on the walls, and that shouldn't be too difficult, because in the timetable you still have the time of the lesson, so you know when to come in and when to come out. Teachers, both teachers and students, and this was not taken very lightly by parents and children. They could not accept that after years and years, some of them never thought of this system before. I'm honest with you, out of thousands of schools in Russia, perhaps a few work without those bells. But we still did it. We still did it. This is, I made a picture. Andreas Mantegna, the Italian painter, made a picture of me after the first parents' assembly, and the parents were really furious about the small change, you know, that we did. And I must say they were furious about other things also, but the thing with the bells, nobody remembered about them after 2 or 3 months. After 2 or 3 months, people got used and settled. Again, the power of habit. And nowadays we live in a quiet environment, and I must say, education-wise, it's more efficient. You know, children don't jump up when the time goes. The teacher has more flexibility with his lesson. He can do it a little longer, a little shorter if he needs to. And psychologically, you know, for a lot of teachers, this has been a relief. You know, but again, a small change, but a very fierce reaction. I don't know why. Now, the other things that that we implement now is that we're introducing co-teaching practices in our primary school. This is the thing that we're starting with in September. Again, this is not something that we invented. I personally picked it up on an IB conference. There was a headmaster from another school sharing his experience of introducing from Düsseldorf school, International Düsseldorf school. And I really liked this idea. I really thought that certain problems within our primary school that I didn't know how to solve, that the co-teaching practice would be a solution for it. Because in Russian traditional educational system, in the primary school, the first 4 years, year 1 to year 4, you would normally have a class of about 20 children and one teacher guiding them for those 4 years. This one teacher would teach Russian, mathematics, and reading and writing, sometimes English, very occasionally. But this one teacher would see them through those 4 years, right? And that, of course, created certain problems. She would be normally a motherly figure. She would normally get very much attached to children and vice versa. And my daughter, for example, she studied in a primary school like that. And during her 4 years, twice the teacher had to change. Once she went, she got pregnant, and found other ways to spend her time. And another time she emigrated, and every time the teacher would leave the class like that, that would be almost a traumatic experience for the class, right? And but you can't do anything about that. People, you know, get pregnant, and in the end, the co-teaching practice, well, instead of having 3 classes with 3 class teachers, would take 3 classes, give them 4 teachers, and those 4 teachers would work with this big group, breaking them into smaller groups every week, or maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the children's needs, specific needs. I think this practice would be more beneficial and would solve many of those problems. And this is what we're implementing in September. I can't share the results so far, but I'm sure it's going to work better. Sometimes, you know, you see the better solution. We introduced some of the, yes, well, this is, I guess, the pictures. We introduced some of the new subjects. We introduced circus classes into the curriculum. Well, I think the idea was good, and the implementation was not so good, not so efficient. But still, a lot of people, a lot of children found, you know, a certain, found it a refreshing experience in comparison with the daily physical routine that we would normally have prior to that, right? A lot, but as I said, the community, a lot of the parents and a lot of the children, well, they could not accept those changes, and to be honest, in this past year, quite some few of them left school, and we depend on parents very much, because private schools are not supported by the state in Russia. They are supported to a minimal extent. So we almost 93% of our budget is come from our parents, 7% from the state. So parents leaving is a problem for us, and a lot of them left. Maybe 40 people left over the year. The same amount joined in, so we are, you know, we are even in the end. But a lot of people left, and that's a pity. But that is a consequence of the fact that we tried to create a more homogeneous community, right? The values that I pointed out, my mother, who was a previous director, she would normally try to appease any conflict of values within the school. And my position is that you don't have to appease that. You actually have to, you know, put some oil on the fire if the fire is there. Because this is the only way for people who are your allies to remain your allies, and people who are, you know, who have a different vision for their children to go look for other places to fulfill this vision, right? Well, one of the examples I want to give is an interesting example that is going along religious, actually, religious lines. You know, when I went to school, we had this case of a arts teacher. You know, during the Easter celebration in Orthodox Easter, during Orthodox Easter, we paint eggs. You know, we paint eggs, and this is a tradition. So she decided to paint eggs with children, and a certain mother was very much annoyed with it, because, you know, she thought that European a school like ours should not introduce religion to school. Well, and I said, well, I thought that this is not a religious introduction. This is simply a tradition which all of the children love, and if they once a year they paint an egg, there's no big deal about that. And the mother actually left school with her. She transferred her child from our school, claiming that we are too religiously motivated somehow. But afterwards, in October, we had the school birthday, and we decided school birthday is very close to Halloween, so we decided to celebrate it in a Halloween fashion. And some other parents left us because they thought that you know, that Halloween is goes against their religious views. So these people thought we are not religious enough, whereas the first bunch of parents thought we're too religious. So in the end, this is what's happening now. Some people are living for contradictory reasons, and you know, some people are unhappy with this or that, and we're trying to find a new community, because I think the most important thing is building up a community, right? Now, I think I'm taking a little too long now. I'll just give a few other examples, of some successful project. This is a picture of our yard, of the territory around the school. And we had the project of transforming this with the architectural group and with our children. So they drew this kind of a map and made a maquette of the of our territory, and we then, together with them and together with Leroy Merlin company, build a certain playground on the territory, which children made a version of. Another example of bringing of this direct communication, of bringing children into the life of school is you cannot see it unfortunately, but you can see it on my presentation if you download it. This is when I had this case. I was sitting in my office, and as I said, this office doesn't have a door, and so there was a third grader. So she was a girl, two girls, maybe they were 9 or 10, and they would rush in and they would say, "We had the lunch in the canteen was not good enough today. It's not tasty." I said, "Well, how come it's not tasty? It's always been tasty." They said, "No, no, no. We need change." And so I told them they should have a referendum. They should have everybody vote on their favorite dish and their least favorite dish in the canteen. And so this is the votes that has been they collected from everybody, from all of those hundreds of students, their votes. Then they had categorized them, and we then went to the canteen and took some dishes out and put some dishes in, and tried to make it more tasty for them, and more pleasant school experience for them. And this is one of the things that that perhaps represents our school at the moment very well. This is, I'm sorry to say, this is my Instagram private messages, and if you could see that, that is a message from that third grader that she decided to write to her headmaster by saying, after a month after the story, she's saying here that, thank you very much, the Georgia, and we introduced National Day Fridays, when the canteen would cook a meal from some country, from Georgia, from Italy, from China, and she's here thanking me for this particular dinner, saying, things are improving. And the fact that we all, of 9 or 10 can write in Instagram directly to the headmaster, I think is very, well, represents our school well. Now, this is all I had to say, and I again think I have a few questions here. What were the biggest challenge when you entered your current school directly as a head teacher? How long did it take to build trust with other teachers? Well, it is a challenge. It was a challenge. I entered in March, April, and over the summer, some of them left. And I think, it's a normal. It's something that should have happened. And there are some people you should not even try to build trust with. Not because you're good and they're bad or vice versa, but just because people see things differently, and there's no big deal about that. But of course, school is about community, and the biggest challenge is to build this community up and create links between teachers within one department and within different departments and within administration and teachers. And this takes time. Some things you cannot just create. They have to grow, and you only can sow the seeds. So this is what we're doing now. I think, what do you think leaders can do to create change in education? Well, I personally think that leaders always know what to do, what they have. You have to support them. You have to be courageous, and you have to be. My only advice would be to talk to talk as much to other people as possible, to ask for advice, and to share your ideas so that people can give you the feedback. You know, sometimes I'm quite certain about some of my ideas, but and I often meet parents, you know, that criticize them bitterly, and you know, any such discussion is normally fruitful. You know, I rarely change my views, but sometimes I do. But my views are never unaffected by the people I meet, and it's always good to listen to as many opinions as possible. You can still keep your own, and you can still go your way, but just do that. And we try to implement it as a rule in school. You know, whenever you have to make a decision, you don't take a decision by your own. You don't keep it to yourself and then throw it at others. You discuss it with as many people as practicable, you know, and as many people specifically who would be affected by this decision, you know. And this rule to ask for advice, you know, I think it's a very powerful rule. Right? What do you think? Do you think the schools it's possible to create a successful environment for every student, considering that all of them have their own needs? Well, with our national curriculum, well, I don't see. I live in the environment that you know, I take some things for granted. This is the environment that I have, and I don't think that we are now, our school, for example, is doing the best it can. You know, maybe at some point we reach a certain limit, and then I say, well, look, with this curriculum, I cannot do more. But I think, well, it's a long way to go. And to be honest, the schools I know in Moscow, other schools I know, even the most progressive ones, they still, a lot of them have a long way to go before they can reasonably, you know, complain that the national curriculum actually prevents them from doing something. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, I think I take my bows here, and if any of you have the questions or interested somehow in what's happening in Moscow or else, you know, I would be very willing to share my and to invite you to show you around school if you're at Moscow, or you can just write me directly. I'm there on the ambassador desk somewhere on HundrED. I think it's pretty easy to find me. Thank you.